Good morning, everyone. Let's get a bit specific this time round. We'll talk about Bangladesh, and hopefully you'll see some general points that you may be able to relate to. In terms of nominal GDP, Bangladesh is probably 135th in the world. By landmass, it is the 94th largest country, so it ranks 94th in the world in terms of physical size. The question I have for you, and I need a show of hands, is what is the ranking of Bangladesh when it comes to the population? Yep, it is the 8th largest country in the world in terms of population. There are only 7 countries with more people in them, and of those 7, only 2 have a younger population than ours. And none of them is remotely as crowded as us. Bangladesh is by far the most densely populated country in the world, apart from city-states. If you put it all together, we have an exceptionally large cohort of young people standing cheek to jowl without much elbow room, digitally connected enough to hold big dreams, but not economically empowered enough to realize them. A year ago, they staged a dramatic uprising. Through enormous sacrifice, they gave us the gift of a new beginning, a journey of reforms and an opportunity to practice better governance. And in about a year's time from now, they're being told that they will graduate up from the status of a least developed country. How should that make us feel? Well, let's take a step back and zoom out. Being an LDC gave us duty-free and quota-free preferential access to developed consumer markets, especially on the backdrop of a world that has been rapidly globalizing over the past 2 or 3 decades. And a world where the modes of production, supply chains became a dominant form of production, we really harnessed that very well by building a ready-made garments industry, RMG. RMG makes up the vast majority of our exports, a significant chunk of which depends on LDC-related preferential access. Over at home, LDC status allows us to produce generic pharmaceutical products without paying for intellectual property, enabling virtually all of domestic supply and some modest exports. And LDC status also allows us to access international finance more cheaply than would have been available commercially. To my knowledge, compared to any other country, the economy of Bangladesh is uniquely reliant, perhaps overly reliant, on LDC privileges. Consequently, reshaping that economy for a post-LDC world is a uniquely complex challenge. By the way, were you here yesterday when I talked about the 5 Ds, the factors of uncertainty? What were they? Deglobalization, digitalization, deficits and debt, decarbonization, demographics. Each one of these contextual factors that characterize the state of uncertainty we're in right now, they magnify the challenge of LDC graduation. Because we have to switch engines while the plane is not only in full flight, but we're also in bad weather conditions. So what do we need to do? Let's go through a few of those. First of all, we need to acknowledge that the fact of graduation is here. It's unavoidable. Even if it's delayed by a couple of years, it does not change our book of work. In fact, the changing world order of aid and tariffs that we saw in just the last few months should make it very clear that there are fewer unilateral, asymmetrical, unconditional favors out there. No one is going to say to us, please enjoy these privileges, continue to access our markets, protect your own markets, and do whatever you like with labor, environmental, or intellectual property standards. The best we can do is to try and ensure a smooth transition as opposed to a sudden cliff switch in our terms of trade. Secondly, not only do we need to acknowledge that, I think we can embrace the opportunities that derive from graduation. Remember that we have sound fundamentals in terms of people and location, and we should be attracting considerable investments if we can get this right. We're starting with a positive vision, a recipe for reforms, which should quickly move into a time-bound roadmap of who needs to do what by when. Thirdly, we need to diversify exports. This will require a more deliberate sales and marketing strategy for our existing products and building the capacity to make new products. Fourth, creation of new products and industries will require new investments, especially foreign investments. And that, in turn, will require practical reforms in logistics and customs, in ports, inland waterways, airports. And that will require changes in the machinery of government, public administration, and perhaps nationwide digital processes that will formalize large parts of the informal sector. We have to negotiate free trade agreements or economic partnership agreements with key countries so that we obtain friction-free access to their markets. Increasingly, these agreements have multiple chapters. Beyond tariffs, they want to talk about labor standards and the movement of people. Skills and training. Skills and training needs urgent focus, targeted training to help workers and entrepreneurs face competition and meet new demand in specialist areas. I was actually in Japan just last week, partly to help conclude what could be our first ever free trade agreement, economic partnership agreement with a major economy, but also to help establish a structured process through which we will send 100,000 skilled workers in targeted vocations over there. But perhaps the most relevant thing for this forum is that our most important export markets, the European Union, for example, will only extend our preferential access to their markets, what is known as GSP+, if we explicitly and verifiably upgrade our standards, especially labor standards. Conversely, if we can demonstrate credible progress in the advancement of those standards, we're likely to receive a sympathetic ear when we ask for transitional privileges. In a post-uprising Bangladesh, the labor reforms agenda is a normative imperative. Nobel Peace Laureate Professor Muhammad Yunus's government is committed to promoting dignity and decency in the workplace because that is the right thing to do, consistent with our values and our mandate. For the first time in history, we stood up a national-level labor reform commission alongside the fundamental commissions looking at constitutional, parliamentary, or judicial reforms, and these are being now taken through a consensus-building process with all political parties ahead of the elections. But in addition to our normative motivation, our business community supports our labor reforms agenda for their own enlightened self-interest, the fact that it has a direct bearing on our access to export markets. Sure, we're nervous. We're nervous about the execution and implementation challenges, but let's be clear, negotiating an extension to LDC graduation or negotiating favorable post-LDC terms will not be easy as long as we have an Article 26 complaint hanging over us at the ILO governing board. The good news is that we expect to have completed the bulk of our obligations under the roadmap agreed with the ILO, both in terms of legislation and the conduct of labor relations. So let me end here. I want to end where I started yesterday. The 3 R's that guide the approach, my approach every day. We have to put rights, relations, and resilience at the center of everything we do, and be mutually compassionate about the challenges of all our stakeholders around the table. Please wish us luck. I thank you for your time.